Welcome to the monthly story swap meeting of the Inland Valley Storytellers. My name is John St. Clair. I'm your Zoom host. And we have already did an introduction before the recording. And now we're just going to jump right into doing stories. Do you have one tonight, Ron? Let's start with check.
That's probably the best we can do. I was actually thinking of telling this story before I was stopped by the highway patrol on the way over here. Now, hang on. My license plate says Tala 2, T-A-L-A, which is Spirit Wolf, and 2 as it also. My current RAV4 is the 6th vehicle with that license plate. The license plate had gotten dim and beaten up, and I thought, oh, I'm up for renewal. I will get a new one. So I went to the DMV and turned in that one, and they're going to call me when the next one comes in, and they gave me a temporary sticker. And the highway patrolman couldn't see the temporary license of the tent. And so he pulled me over and was actually not very nice about it. But I was thinking about telling this story anyway, in which this story came from. The name Tala the Wolf is one of the stories in the book called Stories California Indians Wrote or Told. And this is a story that I haven't told in a while, but I used to tell every year to 4th graders when they studied California history. Chicago, the great god, looked at the vast land that he had created that ended at rocky cliffs beside a great sea. And he thought, this is not perfect yet. What can I do instead? The land was barren. He had created no land things. But in the ocean were Mother Turtle and her 5 children, 6 children. And he called to her and said, Mother Turtle, how is your life? Oh, I'm so tired. We must swim and swim and swim and swim and swim to catch enough food to eat. We can never stop. We can never rest. How would you and your children like to have the food brought to you and you can merely enjoy? Oh, that would be wonderful, great God. Come then. And he lined them up against the rocky shore and said, stick out your rear legs. And the rocks floated around them. Now the great waves will bring you your food every day, and keep your heads out into the water. Slightly above it, everything will be well. And they became California's 7 great islands. The closest of which is Catalina, but there are 6 more. Chicago looked out at the land again. He thought, I have an ocean teeming with life, but nothing on land. And so the next dawn, he got out, he looked out across the land, and he reached down and he touched the ground, and he began to sing. And as he sang, a great tree rose, unlike any other tree that has ever been before or since. And when the tree got big enough and he was satisfied, he pulled it up from the ground and began to shake it. And the first shake dropped tiny leaves, and they became mice or bushes. And as he shook and sang and sang and shook, all the living creatures of the land appeared around the tree of life. But when the tree of life was nothing but a large branch, he looked at it and thought, I do not know what this will be if I cast it down and become a living thing. And he thought and he sang for a moment or two, and he cast it down and it became grizzly bear. You are the greatest of my creatures. You shall be my people, and I shall guide you. And Grizzly looked up and said, yes, sir. For grizzly people to speak as clean as she. Time went on. Chikawa didn't live with them all the time. He went out the rest of the earth and raised different things in different places. But he kept coming back to his California area and finally decided to make for himself a home. So he went up into the cloud bank and he began to cast down from the clouds whatever it was he was casting down. And as it did, out of the ground rose a great mountain, the highest peak for miles and miles and miles around, and it was hollow. And this he made for his home. And this became Shasta, the great mountain, the sacred mountain, the mountain of life and hope. You could always tell when he was home. For when he was staying in the mountain, smoke would come out of it. But most of the time it didn't. Time went on. Grizzly people became great and numerous. Grizzly mother grew old and stopped having children. Her daughters and her granddaughters and her granddaughters, they continued to expand the people, and life went on. But she missed having babies. And Chikawa had taken the moon's daughter as his bride, and they had a child, Shikiwa. Shikiwa had long, straight black hair and a sunny smile and filled with the world with laughter. That particular winter, a northern storm blew through. And at the top of the mountain, there was the hole. And the noise began to get on Chikawa's nerves, and he said, "Wife, climb up to the top of the mountain and pull the cover over the hole. I am busy making dinner." "I'll go, Daddy," said Chikawa. "That is fine, but do not look out into the wide world in this storm." "I won't, Daddy." But of course, as everyone has ever known in all the history of the earth, the moment you have promised your parents you will not do something, the temptation to do it becomes great. And she reached the top out and she looked out at the flying clouds, and she cast her head a little higher, a little higher, a little higher, and the wind caught her long black hair and pulled her up and out into the world. And she laughed and tumbled in the sky, for she knew she was in no danger from anything on the earth. But it was a long time before the winds let her touch the ground, and she found herself in a forest of great trees, no one to speak to, no idea how far it was to move. And who should come along but Grizzly Mother? And she saw the frightened child, and she knew instantly that this was Chikawa's daughter, and she should take her immediately to him. But with picture in her arms, the child put her arms around her neck and she decided, he will not mind if I keep him for a day or two. And so she did. She brought her home and introduced her to the people and said, I will raise her as my daughter. And time went on. Then the child grew somewhat, not at the rate of mortals. And the two of them were great friends. But Chikawa kept hunting his daughter. Oh, not all the time. He had other duties, but whenever he was out in the wide world, he looked for any hint of his missing child. He knew she could not be dead. So Grizzly Mother became fearful and thought, I know what I'll do. I know what I'll do. Hey, grizzly children, gather rocks and stones. Hey, make for me a mountain very much like the sacred mountain Shasta, hollowed out inside. Place it near the mountain, for we must have a special home for our special ones. And it was done. And little Shasta stands there to this day. Time went on. Grizzly Mother grew very old, and she began to wonder, what have I done? Is this the right choice to have made? What a Chikawa should come upon it and be mad at my people instead of me. It is all my fault. So she spoke to the oldest of her sons and said, I want you to climb all the way to the top of Shafton and call down inside. The grizzly mother has Shakira. Hey, if you would like to see her again. It was a dangerous mission, but not a hard one. The hardy bear climbed rapidly, reached the top, and crept up to the very hole and whispered down, come, grizzly mother has Shakira, your daughter. And if you would like to see her again, come to Grizzly Village. And then he began to climb back down. And the whole mountain shook with the roar of Shakira's anger. He came flying out the top. He rushed down the side of the mountain, destroying bushes and trees and leaving a crack that is there to this day of molten rock behind him. And he reached the village of grizzly people and said, how dare you? Grizzly mother came out and said, your daughter is unharmed. She is here. She loves me. How dare you keep my child from me? Grizzly Papa was upset. This was the woman that he loved, and she was being treated like a small child. And he rose up on his feet and said, Chicago, you cannot down on all fours. Never again shall you walk upright across the land except in the greatest of extreme needs, and you may not speak to me again. And all the grizzly people then went on forward. You could not speak to each other and divided off. And Shakira went home with her father. And life proceeded indifferent, but just as good. And that is why we have Little Shasta, Long Shaft, and how we happen to have 7 islands.
Thank you, Ron. I don't think I've ever heard that story.
Really, I haven't told them in years. Literally changed getting my new copy of Tala license plate brought it to mine. So I've been planning to tell it. And
Yeah.
of course, I didn't expect to be pulled over by the CHP.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm going to tell the next story, and then we'll go to the Zoom people and see if they have any stories. So my story is a folktale from Japan, and it's called The Mountain Where the Old People Were Abandoned. Long, long ago, there was a lord who decreed that all old people, when they reached a certain age, had to be taken to a mountain canyon and left there to die. His reasoning was when people reached a certain age that they could no longer work in the fields or work at their trade, they were no longer useful. And so that was the law of the land. Now there was a young farmer whose father had reached that age of abandonment. And so he carried his father on his back and went off towards the mountain canyon. And as he was taking his father on this path to the mountain canyon, the father would reach out and he would break off twigs and branches on the side of the trail. And his son noticed that. He said, Father, are you marking the trail so that you'll be able to find your way back home? And the old man said, No, it is not for me, it is for you, my son. Because I'm afraid that you might lose your way back home, and I would feel terrible if you got lost on my account. So I'm marking the trail so you will be able to make it back home safely. Well, this struck home with the young farmer. It reminded him how kind and wise his father had been to him, and how much his father had taught him while growing up. And so he shifted his father on his back, he turned around, and he started walking back home. And when he got home, he decided he would hide his father in the basement in the daytime. If anybody came by, they wouldn't see him. And at night, when it was dark, he would get him out of the basement and feed him dinner and have him sleep in the house. But the next morning, he'd go back and hide in the basement. And that worked out pretty well. Now, the Lord of this land was unusual and very whimsical. He thought it would be fun to give people weird and nearly impossible tasks to do. And so one day he went to the community where this farmer lived, and he said, I would like each of you to bring me a rope woven from ashes. Well, they all kind of shook their head, and it sounded like something impossible to do. So when the young farmer went home that night, he told his father what the Lord of the land had told them to do, and the old man smiled and said, well, I want you to tightly, very tightly, weave a rope, and then I want you to set it on fire, and it will burn the outside into ashes, but it will not burn all the way through, and if you carry it carefully, it will stay intact, and you can take it to the Lord, and it'll look like ashes woven into a rope. And so the young farmer did that. He followed the advice of his father, and it worked. So the next day, he was the only one who took the Lord a rope woven from ashes. And the Lord was very impressed and told the young farmer that he was impressed that he was able to figure it out so quickly. Well, the next task he gave was he said he wanted them to bring him a conch shell that had a string all the way through from the big opening to the end where a hole could be made and pull it through. Well, if you know how conch shells are made with the chambers, it's a difficult task. And again, everybody should do that. And that evening at dinner, when the young farmer told his father what the task was, the old man smiled and he said, here's what you do. You put a hole in the tip of the shell so light can get in. And then you take a grain of rice and tie a string around it. And then you find very healthy looking ant. And you put the grain of rice in the shell with the ant and close up the big opening so no light can get through. The ant will see the grain of rice and he will instinctively go towards the light at the other end and pull that string all the way through and come out. So the young farmer followed his father's advice and it worked. So the next day he took the conch shell that had been strung all the way through. And the Lord was very impressed again. He said, how do you solve these riddles so quickly? I'm very impressed. And the young farmer took a deep breath and he said, well, my Lord, I love my father very much. And I just couldn't take him to that mountain valley to die. And so I've been keeping him in the basement during the daytime so no one could see him. And then he comes up into the house at night, I feed him dinner, I care for him, and he gets to sleep in a nice bed. And when you gave us these challenges, I told them to my father, and he quickly came up with the solutions and told me what to do. Well, the Lord was very impressed with the young farmer's devotion to his father, and also impressed with the wisdom of his father. And he realized that maybe it wasn't such a good idea to get rid of all the knowledge of all the old people. Perhaps they could be useful after all, just in a different way. And so he decreed an end of the policy of old age abandonment, and that old people should be respected and honored. And so it was, and so it should. Thank you. You got to hear it? Do you have a story for us? Well, we'll have you go next then, because we're doing all the ones here first, and then I'll move the computer over to the other side. When we have people from Zoom tell a story. And before you start your story, so you stand in front here and introduce yourself, because we all introduced ourselves. Although I think the person from Sacramento left.
Yeah, he suddenly went dark and then shut off his connection. I don't know if there was a problem of some kind.
Huh, well, that's too bad. Well, I guess you don't have to introduce yourself, because we all know who you are.
But I will apologize for my tardiness. I had to pick somebody up at the airport. And that is always a task, because the planes happily mostly land safely, but seldom on time. It's a story about a boy who loved to ride trains. And every summer, I think they lived in Minnesota, his mother and father and the lad took the train to Iowa, where the grandparents lived on a farm. And at the time, the boy was very, very small. This was a summer activity that he always looked forward to. One, because he appreciated the farm. Two, because he adored his grandparents. But let's face it, mostly because he really enjoyed riding. Year after year, summer after summer, that was it. His 11th year, he got up enough courage to ask his parents if he might go a week ahead of them on this annual trip, and to go alone on the train. Well, that was a responsibility that his parents were not sure that he was up to undertaking, if you will forgive the proverbs there. I think they thought about it deeply, and maybe for a couple of days, and then finally decided, well, yes, why shouldn't he be able to do that? He's well trained, he's a polite boy, will make sure that he has all that he needs. He's done this a number of times, he's taken good note of what happens. I think that we should allow him to do this, and it will be a good learning experience. He was delighted. And so that next week, when the trip was arranged for him to go a week ahead of time, knowing that his parents would come the following week, they took him to the train station and with great anticipation awaited the train. And the train was almost on time, but it got there in enough time. The boy got on the train, and his parents got on the train with him, got him settled in the seat, and the whistle, which meant that it was not started up, so they dashed off the train, came around the window, And there were all kinds of signs and shouting back and forth with last minute encouragements and instructions. And finally, the boy being bored with all of this, got straight ahead and off the train. Well, it was an interesting experience to be alone on the train. He loved looking out the window, but he couldn't help but notice that there were a lot of people in the car who were taking notice of him. Especially saying, oh, the boy is traveling by himself. Think of those parents that are not attentive enough to their son to be alone. Who on earth would do that? And the conductor as well, when he came along, said, are you traveling home? So I am, sir, said, well, in the cases. Parents with you, anybody else? No, I hear it alone, really. Well, make sure you behave. Well, everybody on the car sort of buzzing about the fact that, and though he was fine himself, with all of this vibing going around, he was becoming a little bit more nervous and maybe even a little more concerned. And that goes to the next step is frightened and then darn near scared. And at that point, he remembered something. Just before he got on the train, his parents had given him a little yellow piece of paper. And something was written on it, folded it in half, and just put it in his pocket. And said, if you need anything, you may want to just refer to this last minute big instruction. And lo and behold, he remembered that it was there. He pulled it up, and he opened it, and read it. If you are frightened, don't be worried. I'm in the back of the last car. Goodbye.
Thank you, Ron.
It was great.
I love surprising. Okay, so I'm gonna, Nick, do you have a story?
I do.
Okay, I'm gonna remove the spotlight on me and put it on you. Fortunately, Ina's here also so that we can do spotlight. There's only 2 people you can't do spotlight. Okay, we can all see you.
Oh, good. Well, when John started his story, I was startled but amused because I am also doing a story from Japan, or at least mostly from Japan. And that's because there are at least 2 versions of this story. And oddly enough, they're from Japan and Finland and not places in between. So story historians have been puzzled by this for many years. But anyway, this is the story of 2 millstones. You see, I must tell you something about an obscure tradition in Japan. When a family has more than one son and not enough property to divide between them as their parents pass away, then there is a tradition that the younger son is to be sort of adopted out to a family that has only daughters. And he marries one of the daughters, but becomes part of the other family. This tradition translates as an adopted husband. Now, not everybody wants to do this because, first, it's kind of a sign that, well, I'm an adopted husband because my family was too broke to have enough property to divide between my brother and I, is kind of an embarrassing thing. But also, it means you're being adopted out to marry someone you've probably never met and don't love or even have anything in common with. And so it was that the younger brother in this story refused to be sent out as an adopted husband. He said, no, no, you keep the property, have your own life, I'll make my own way. And don't you know that even though he was very poor, he found a young woman that fell in love with him, and he fell in love with her, and they were still very poor even though they were together. But he tried to make a living doing work for other people, farmers and merchants who needed a helper, and they were allowed to live in a hut that would belonged on property that was owned by a friend of theirs that wasn't being used for anything else. And all was well and good for the first several months of their marriage, but toward the end of the year, there was a custom that the very last meal of the year was to be shared with the deity that ruled the end of the year. You were supposed to make a small feast and share it. And work had not been going well. Not as many people needed a helper at that time of the year. And he'd had to spend his money for food for himself and his wife. So he had nothing to prepare for the feast for the end of the year, the one to share with the god. So he went to his brother to see if he could at least borrow some rice to have a meal to pretend it was a feast. And his brother looked at him and said, "You don't even have enough food to have the year-end feast? I'm ashamed to have you as my brother. What a foolish thing you've done. You could have been an adopted husband and lived well with a family that needed a husband to marry one of their daughters. But no, you were too stubborn. You were too, oh, I don't know what to do about you." And he went back inside his house and closed the door. Well, the younger brother was very sad, and he walked away, and he didn't want to go directly home because he had to think. And so he walked up and down the hills, and there, on top of one of the hills, he found an older gentleman who looked like he was having trouble standing back up after sitting down. And being a kind man, he went over and helped the older man stand up. And the older man said, "Thank you. I was having a great deal of trouble standing back up. I was sitting too long. What can I do for you? And why are you out wandering at this time of day?" And the younger brother told him the story about not having enough food for the year-end feast. And he said, "Oh, well, I might be able to help you a little bit." And he rummaged through his own belongings and pulled out a dumpling. Now, this is not for the year-end feast. This is going to permit you to get something suitable for the year-end feast because you have to trade this dumpling. And the younger brother looked at him and said, "What could I trade a dumpling for? And who could I trade it with?" And the older man said, "Ah, that's the secret. Down the next hill, you'll hear the sound of a party going on in a hole in the ground. That's where the tiny folk live. They love dumplings. They'll give you anything for this dumpling. But you have to ask them to trade the 2 millstones they have for this dumpling. They'll offer you gold, they'll offer you anything else, but say, no, only the millstones will do." Well, the young man accepted the dumpling and thought, that was a very strange story, and I don't know if I believe him, but he was a nice old man, and maybe it's true. And all right, I'll go down the hill. And when he got to the bottom of the hill, there was a hole in the ground and music coming out of it and singing and the sounds of what sounded like a party. And he went down to the bottom of the hill and looked in the hole, and inside the hole, there were dozens of little tiny people there, all having a party. And, well, he didn't want to scare them, so he very quietly said, "Hello." Well, the sounds of the party stopped and faces turned toward him. "Oh, you're one of those big folk, aren't you?" Yes, yes. And I was told I have something you might want. And he pulled out the dumpling, and all the tiny folk in the hole went, ooh. And then they started pulling out things of value to offer him for the dumpling. They pulled out coins. They pulled out pieces of gold. They pulled out jewelry. And he said, no, no. What I really need is a set of millstones. Do you have something like that? And all the tiny folk went silent. We do, but you're asking for a lot more than you think. And you have to follow the instructions on these millstones very carefully. Well, if you teach me the instructions, I will do my best. The instructions are turn them to the right to get your heart's desire. Turn them to the left to stop. Well, that seems very simple. All right. And they brought out 2 tiny millstones, each of which was no bigger than you could hold in the palm of your hand. And for that, they accepted the dumpling and began to cut it up and share it amongst them. As each one got a taste of the dumpling, they went, ooh. And he took the tiny millstones and went back outside and thought he would test them. I still need rice for the dinner. Let me see. Millstones, can you get me some rice? And he turned the millstones so that they were grinding away to the right, and rice started piling up in front of him. Oh, this will be wonderful. My wife and I will have food for dinner, and we'll have the year-end feast. And so he picked up the millstones again, and he walked all the way home. And his wife said, were you successful at getting some food from your brother? And he said, not exactly, but on my way back, I got something that will provide us with some food. Well, that's not the kind of thing you hear from a husband that you think would be reassuring. But he said, wait, before you get angry, before you get upset, let me show you. And he proceeded to produce rice, ready to cook. And she said, well, can it produce other things? And he began to test it. And he got fresh fish, and he got seasonings. And then he thought, what if I try other things than just food? And so he used the millstones and produced new fine clothing for his wife, and something for himself as well, and new dishes to serve the food in. And they produced more and more just to try different things to see what they could make. Well, they had a very fine feast that night, with a serving set aside for the god of the year's end. But as the days went on and the new year started, work still hadn't picked up. So he used the millstone to produce things that he needed: food, coins that he would spend on things that he wasn't sure the millstone could produce. And then he started experimenting with the millstones, and he eventually produced enough to have a whole house, not just the hut that they'd been living in. He didn't think his friend would care if they built a house next to the hut. He wasn't using that part of his land anyway. But his older brother was kind of puzzled because his younger brother hadn't come back to beg for more things. And so he went over. Now, the older brother was surprised because the last time he'd visited his younger brother, the younger brother and his wife are living in a hut. Now there was a house next to the hut, and that's where his brother and brother's wife seemed to be living. He went up and knocked on the door, and his brother welcomed him in. And the interior of the house was furnished with things his brother could never have afforded before. You seem to be doing so well. Yes, yes, I'm doing much better since I last saw you. But he didn't explain anything about the millstones. He didn't want to give away the secret. The older brother said, there must be something that I can get you to talk about. And so they talked about family memories and things like that for a little bit. And the older brother said, well, I have to be getting home. And he went out the door and down the hill, but not all the way home. He waited and sneaked cautiously back to the house to see if there was anything he could learn about how his brother was suddenly so much better off. And he quietly peeked into the window. And there he saw his brother turning the millstones and producing rice, and turning them again and producing fish. He's getting his food from those millstones. I wonder if there's something else that they can produce. And he watched as his brother produced small utensils, pieces of furniture, things that he could have for use around the house, or that perhaps he could sell, because he didn't want his neighbors to understand that he was getting everything magically. So he wanted to be able to sell things in the market to seem like he was getting things normally. Well, said the older brother, I wonder what I could do with those millstones. And so he waited until his brother and his brother's wife had gone to sleep, and sneaked into the house and took the two tiny millstones and went off and thought, hmm, I could go to a far off land and make myself rich there where nobody knows that I've come from a poor family. Yes, that's what I'll do. I'll become rich, and I'll find a wonderful wife to marry that would only marry a rich man, and I'll produce everything I need with these millstones. And he got himself a boat, and he set sail on the boat. And he started thinking, I should test this to see what else I can make. I only saw the things that my brother made. I wonder if I can produce some salt. That's always useful. That's something I can sell. And he used the millstones and he turned them to the right, and they started producing salt. This is wonderful. But when he stopped turning, the millstones kept producing salt. He didn't know that you had to turn the millstones to the left to get them to stop. So as his little boat kept sailing, it slowly filled up with salt. And he didn't know what to do because he could toss it overboard, but it just kept filling the boat. And finally, it produced salt faster than he could toss it overboard, and far out into the water. The boat sank, filled with salt, and the older brother and the two tiny millstones sank with it. The younger brother didn't have the millstones anymore, but he had things that he could sell, and once he got to be known in the marketplace, people were willing to hire him to do work. And he got back on his feet financially and in terms of happiness. But he wondered what had happened to his brother and to the millstones. But we know today, because all the seas from Japan outward, as far as there is water in the oceans, that water has the taste of salt.
Thank you, Nick. So does anybody else have a story? I think we might be done. He left. Or wait, did he? Yeah. Yep, he left, unfortunately. I don't know whether he had connection problems or something came up or what. I'll email him when I get home.
Well, I will say that I was having trouble with the sound early in the meeting, so he may have been having that same trouble.
I was gonna say the same thing. It was really difficult to hear the stories for those of you who are present because the echoing was not good.
Yeah, yeah, it's very echoey because there's nothing on the walls, nothing.
Well, also it felt like it felt like the volume was low for some reason, and that combined with the echo made it difficult.
Well, the volume was turned all the way up.
Right, but for some reason it wasn't coming through very loud. I had to turn my sound way up on my computer just to get a decent volume.
Yeah, so maybe that's what happened.
But anyway, I was going to, since we're finished, I was going to show you the book where I found that story. This is a book that came out about 60 years ago, Folktales of Japan, and it was edited originally in Japanese by a Japanese collector of stories, and this is the translation that came out in the United States. But it has some delightful stories in it because since she was there in Japan collecting the stories, she had the ones that people in Japan know that people in other places don't get around to in the little collections you normally see.
And you say it was published 50 years ago?
60 years ago.
60 years.
Yeah, in the early 60s. But there's even a history of story collecting in Japan that I found fascinating because I thought that stories from Japan weren't really translated into English much until around the late Victorian period. But she came up with an example as far back as the 1870s, where somebody had collected a bunch of stories and translated them into English.
What's her name? Who collected the stories?
It's Keigo, Keigo, Seki, Seki, is the one who did this collection. And she said the first one was a collection called Tales of Old Japan. And it was an English nobleman who collected those, Lord Redesdale, but he used the name A.B. Mitford on his books because he was nobility, and nobility weren't also supposed to be authors, he thought. And he did that, he collected that story collection in 1871, which was only less than 20 years after Japan was open to the West again.
Fascinating. Okay, I suppose I should share with people what the Bay Area Storytelling Festival was like.
Sure.
I'm gonna put myself on the spotlight here. Okay, so I think we'll just leave it there. So Chris and I went up to Santa Rosa to attend the Bay Area Storytelling Festival, and the main tellers were Willie Claflin and Dovey Thomason and Charlotte Blake Alston, all good experienced storytellers that we had heard before. And then a new guy who was a spoken word artist, African American, and he had been it's either the 2018 or the 2019 America's Got Talent competition. He was the winner of it and received $1 million prize, and used that to kind of launch a career in performing. And somehow somebody in the storytelling community heard about him, or maybe he heard about storytelling, I don't know. But the Bay Area Storytelling Festival was his first appearance at a storytelling event.
What
And
was his name?
I don't remember. I don't remember. And he was from Stockton. So he's from Central California. And he was quite interesting. The first night, the sound system was not good. And he told narrative and the story like thing, but then he had these sections of poetry that was like rap without the music. And he would speak very fast, and with the bad sound system, we really couldn't hear him very well. But the second day, we could hear him much better, and I enjoyed it. And then the showcase tellers, there were 5 of us that are SAC members, Storytelling Association of California. And I was one of the 5. I was the only male. And those stories went well, and I felt very good about my story.
Which did you pick?
So I told the king and the peasant. The story about the farmer who answered the king's questions with riddles. And it's the story I told that week right here. And it worked out fine because it was good. I got to practice it here. I did much better there because I really worked on it. I felt good about it.
Good.
So, Nick, do you have any announcements?
The only thing that I wanted to share is that I've been continuing to help with the NSN calendar with Margaret Reed McDonald, because the person who was assisting her lost her home to the Eaton fire. And it turns out she's a storyteller that I had never met. It turns out there was an African-American woman storyteller living in Altadena all this time. And we didn't know because she was with one of the storytelling groups that doesn't talk to the other storytelling groups. She was with one of the ones based on Toastmasters, and they're kind of off in their own little world. But I'm trying to get in touch with her to see, because she apparently, Margaret thought highly of her, but I had never heard her perform or anything. But anyway, so the calendar, the NSN calendar, people are just not submitting their events or doing it at the last minute, so that the version that goes out in the NSN newsletter is very minimal at this point in time. It's very discouraging. I put in a couple of things from the West Coast because I was teasing the people at SAC about, you're not putting things out there for anybody to find out about. And so I put in the festival you were at, and another thing the previous month. I have no idea if anybody was going to them from seeing that, but it really needs to be done. And for our stuff, for our events like the Telebration, and next time we do a performance event like a concert, we've got to put it in the NSN calendar to spread word that storytelling is actually happening in California, because this is getting silly. I mean, literally no California events were being put into the NSN calendar.
I did put last year's Celebration in.
Good.
And I also put in the joint celebration. I put them both in the November calendar. But I don't put our story swaps in. Do you think I should put that in?
Well, there are only a couple of the story swap groups that are doing it, and there's certainly room.
Okay.
And because there's a Zoom component, people all over the country could link in, so that wouldn't be an obstacle to attending.
I just noticed something. I went to the Claremont Heritage website to find out what their hours were, because I had to pay our monthly rent.
Mm-hmm.
And they have an online calendar of events, and we're not on there. And so I asked about that when I went into the office to pay. And so I'm gonna see if we can get our meetings on their calendar. It should be, I mean, we're using their facility, it's open to the public, it's free. It is a public service of sorts.
Yeah,
I don't know why I didn't think of it sooner,
that's not a bad idea.
because maybe we might get some people who happen to notice it on their calendar.
Sure.
Always use more listeners.
Yes. And I'm pleased with our turnout tonight. Last month was very disturbing.
Just a better.
Oh, it depends.
So next month, we will again be the second Tuesday because of
Mondays are,
the concert, yeah. The parking would be horrendous.
so you wouldn't be able to hear yourself think.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Come to the concert, good fun.
Well, now that my conflict got rescheduled, I may be able to get out there next month. This time it was just I had too much to do.
Are you going to Timpanogos?
No, my niece is getting married that weekend, and I have obligations in Southern California. Yeah, and, I missed, it was her twin sister's graduation that caused me to miss the Bay Area Festival. We were in Oregon for our graduation.
Yeah.
The Robbins twins are truly remarkable, multi-talented, brilliant, creative, beautiful young women who have found men from totally different backgrounds, who seem to match them well.
Good, good.
Audrey is literally secretly married. They married because they were afraid of political trouble, things going on in immigration. But she's having a formal wedding.
Mhm.
And her husband graduated #2 from Colorado University. And was immediately snatched up by Microsoft and has already gotten 2 promotions in a single year.
Oh my God.
But of course, he's afraid he's going to be deported tomorrow.
Where's he from?
Anyway, in Africa.
That's too bad.
And it's like, well, yeah, you got a student visa, and now you've got an American wife, and you can actually present yourself as an educated, creative. It didn't cost America 1 penny. It didn't cost anybody anything. My family paid my entire costs. I've lived here for years. I've got my degrees. I did extremely well in school, and I'm well employed. Why would you bother me?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't we want him?
Hopefully they won't bother.
Or anybody else?
Anyway, so, no, I'm gonna missing the storytelling events because families express this.
Oh, yeah.
College graduations are, from my standpoint, you arrive and you show up and you cheer, and you carry on like you're a madman because so few do it. So many just don't.
Okay, well, I think I'm gonna end the recording and thank you all for joining.
All right.
And we'll see you next month, hopefully.
Yes.